The rain came down in sheets that September evening, hammering the corrugated metal roof of the garage bay, where Marcus Webb sat, hunched over an engine block, his hands black with grease. Thunder rolled across the flat expanse of eastern Montana, rattling the windows of Webb's auto repair on the outskirts of Billings. He worked alone, as he always did, because that was how he preferred it. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with each lightning strike, but Marcus didn't flinch. He'd learned long ago not to react to anything. At 42, Marcus Webb had perfected the art of isolation. His shop sat at the end of a gravel road, far enough from town that most customers had to really need his services to make the drive. That suited him fine. He was good at what he did, exceptional even, and word of mouth kept enough work coming through the door that he could pay his bills and keep to himself. The less people knew about him, the better. The less he knew about them, the safer everyone was. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It really helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now, let's get back to Marcus. The wind picked up outside, howling through the gaps in the garage door. Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since stopped being useful for cleaning anything. He glanced at the clock on the wall, nearly 7. He'd been working for 11 hours straight, surviving on black coffee and the sandwich he'd made that morning. This was his routine. Work until exhaustion made thinking impossible, then go home to the small house behind the shop, microwave whatever was in the freezer, and sleep until the nightmares woke him around 3 in the morning. He was reaching for his toolbox when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A scratching, persistent and deliberate, coming from the side door that opened onto the lot where customers parked. Marcus froze, his body tensing with the old instincts he'd tried for years to bury. In his experience, nothing good ever came from unexpected visitors after dark. The scratching continued, accompanied now by a low whining sound. Marcus grabbed the heavy wrench from his workbench and moved toward the door. He'd installed 3 deadbolts and a chain after buying the place 6 years ago, and he checked each one every night before leaving. Trust no one. That was the rule he lived by, the rule that had kept him alive when others hadn't been so lucky. He waited, listening. The whining grew more insistent, almost desperate. Not human, he realized. An animal. Probably a stray looking for shelter from the storm. Montana was full of them. Dogs dumped on rural roads by people who couldn't be bothered to take them to a shelter, left to fend for themselves or die trying. Marcus almost turned away. Not his problem. He had enough to deal with, without adding a starving animal to the mix. But something in the sound, a quality of desperation that he recognized all too well, made him pause. Against every instinct screaming at him to mind his own business, he unbolted the door and opened it a crack. Rain immediately spattered against his face. In the dim glow of the exterior light, he saw a dog sitting in a puddle, soaked to the skin, shivering violently. A border collie, black and white, with one ear standing up and the other flopped over. The dog looked up at him with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more awareness than most people Marcus had met. Blood matted the fur on the dog's left side, dark and glistening in the rain. Jesus, Marcus muttered. The dog didn't move, didn't bark or growl. It just sat there, trembling, waiting. There was something in its stillness that unnerved Marcus, a patience that suggested this animal understood it was at someone else's mercy and was willing to accept whatever judgment came. Marcus knew that feeling intimately. He should close the door, call animal control in the morning if he bothered to call at all. Getting involved meant complications, and complications meant people asking questions, and questions meant risk. He'd built his entire life around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. The dog's eyes never left his face. "Damn it," Marcus said, and opened the door wider. The border collie didn't rush inside. Instead, it stood slowly, favoring its left side, and limped through the doorway with a dignity that made Marcus's chest tighten. Once inside, the dog sat again, water pooling around it on the concrete floor, and waited for Marcus to decide what came next. Marcus closed and bolted the door, then stood there looking at the dog, trying to figure out what he'd just done and why. The animal was in bad shape. Besides the injury on its side, which looked like a deep gash, possibly from barbed wire, the dog was severely underweight, its ribs visible even through the wet fur. It had been on its own for a while. That much was clear. "You picked the wrong guy to show up to," Marcus said. "I don't do rescues." The dog tilted its head slightly, as if considering this statement and finding it questionable. Marcus grabbed an old blanket from the cabinet where he kept cleaning supplies and tossed it toward the dog. "At least get warm. Then you're out of here first thing tomorrow." To his surprise, the dog stood, dragged the blanket to a corner of the garage, arranged it into something resembling a nest, and lay down, curling into a tight ball. The whole process took maybe 30 seconds and displayed a level of self-sufficiency that Marcus found oddly impressive. He returned to his workbench, trying to focus on the engine in front of him, but he kept glancing at the corner where the dog lay. The animal hadn't made a sound since coming inside. It just rested there, breathing steadily, occasionally lifting its head to look around as if cataloging its surroundings. After 20 minutes, Marcus gave up pretending to work. He washed his hands in the utility sink, then approached the corner with caution. The dog watched him come, but didn't move, didn't tense. Marcus knelt a few feet away, keeping his distance. "I'm going to look at that cut," he said, feeling ridiculous for talking to a dog. "Don't bite me." The dog remained still as Marcus edged closer and gently pulled back the matted fur. The gash was deep but clean, probably a day or two old. It would need stitches ideally, but Marcus had learned battlefield medicine during a part of his life he tried not to think about. He had supplies in the house, had kept a well-stocked medical kit for years because you never knew when you might need to patch yourself up and couldn't risk a hospital's questions. "Stay here," he said, standing. The dog's eyes tracked him as he walked to the door that connected the garage to his house. Marcus paused, hand on the knob, then looked back. "I mean it. Stay." The border collie lowered its head onto its paws, never breaking eye contact. Inside the house, Marcus retrieved his medical kit from the bathroom cabinet. The small ranch-style home was as sparse as the shop. Furniture chosen for function over comfort, walls bare of decoration, nothing that revealed anything about who he was or had been. He'd rented it furnished when he first came to Billings, then bought the property when the owner died, and the estate wanted a quick sale. The fewer records, the better. When he returned to the garage, the dog was exactly where he'd left it, which surprised him more than it should have. Most animals would have explored, searched for food, marked territory. This one just waited. Marcus set up a work light and brought over a metal stool. He had antibiotics, gauze, surgical tape, and a curved needle with thread that he'd sterilized and never hoped to use. The dog watched his preparations, but didn't move. "This is going to hurt," Marcus said, "but you already know that, don't you?" He cleaned the wound with betadine solution, working carefully. The dog flinched but didn't pull away, didn't snap or growl. Its muscles remained tense under his hands, every nerve clearly firing pain signals. But it endured. Marcus had seen soldiers with less self-control. The stitching took 40 minutes. Marcus worked methodically, each suture placed with precision. He'd always had steady hands. It was why they'd picked him for certain jobs back in the day, jobs that required patience and an absolute absence of hesitation. The dog barely moved throughout the entire process, just breathed steadily and stared at the far wall as if concentrating on something beyond Marcus's ability to perceive. When he finished, Marcus wrapped the wound with clean gauze and secured it with tape. "Best I can do," he said, sitting back on his heels. "You need rest and food. I've got some ground beef in the freezer that's probably past its prime for human consumption." The dog looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus felt something uncomfortable shift in his chest. Those eyes held intelligence, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe. As if the dog could see past the walls Marcus had spent years building, straight through to whatever remained of the person he'd been before everything fell apart. He stood abruptly. "I'll get that food." In the kitchen, Marcus thawed the ground beef in the microwave and dumped it into a bowl, adding some rice he'd cooked 2 days ago. He filled another bowl with water and carried both back to the garage. The dog hadn't moved, but its nose twitched when it smelled the food. Marcus set the bowls down a few feet away and retreated to his workbench. "Eat." The dog stood carefully, favoring its injured side, and approached the bowls. It drank first, long and deep, then turned to the food. But instead of wolfing it down the way a starving animal should, the dog ate slowly, deliberately, as if it understood the importance of not making itself sick. Marcus found himself watching, unable to look away. There was something profoundly wrong about this situation. Dogs didn't behave this way, not strays, not traumatized animals left to die. This level of control, this self-possession, came from training. Serious training, which meant this dog had an owner, or had one recently, which meant complications Marcus absolutely could not afford. The dog finished eating and returned to its blanket, settling down with a soft sigh. Marcus walked to the side door and opened it, looking out at the rain. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Water ran in rivers down the gravel drive, and lightning continued to strobe across the sky. He closed the door, locked it, and turned back to find the dog watching him again. "Tomorrow," Marcus said. "Tomorrow I make some calls, find out who you belong to. This is temporary." The dog blinked slowly, then closed its eyes. Marcus returned to his house, locking the connecting door behind him. He microwaved a burrito, ate it standing over the sink, and tried not to think about the dog in his garage or what its presence might mean. He'd survived this long by keeping his distance, by never allowing anyone or anything close enough to matter. The military had taught him how to compartmentalize, and the things he'd done afterward had taught him why that skill was essential for survival. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain drum against the windows. He thought about the dog's eyes, about the way it had endured pain without complaint, about how it had sat in the rain, waiting for someone to open the door. There was a story there, a history Marcus didn't want to know because knowing would mean caring, and caring would mean vulnerability. At 3:15 in the morning, he woke from the same nightmare he'd had for 6 years. Screams echoing through smoke, hands reaching, his own voice shouting warnings that came too late. He sat up gasping, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around his legs. The house was silent except for the diminishing rain. Marcus pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, then walked through the dark house to the door connecting to the garage. He told himself he just wanted to check that everything was locked, that the dog hadn't somehow gotten into something it shouldn't have. But when he opened the door and flipped on the lights, the border collie was sitting up, looking at him as if it had been waiting. "Can't sleep either?" Marcus asked quietly. The dog's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement. Marcus walked into the garage and sat on the concrete floor, his back against a tire rack. The dog watched him for a moment, then stood and limped over, settling down about 3 feet away. Close, but not touching. Present without demanding anything. They sat like that for nearly an hour, neither moving, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves outside. Marcus felt something in that silence, a companionship that demanded nothing, and offered no judgments. It was the first time in years he'd felt comfortable in another living being's presence. When the sky began to lighten, Marcus stood. "All right, let's figure out who you belong to." But even as he said it, part of him hoped he wouldn't find an answer. The border collie was still asleep when Marcus opened the shop at 7:30 the next morning. He'd showered, made coffee, and spent an hour on his laptop searching lost dog reports in Yellowstone County and surrounding areas. Nothing matched. He'd found plenty of posts about missing pets, each one representing someone's grief, but none described a black and white border collie with one floppy ear. Marcus told himself he was relieved. The longer the dog stayed lost to whatever system was supposed to care for lost animals, the less likely anyone would come looking. Which was stupid thinking, because he didn't want the dog. He didn't want anything that tied him to responsibility or forced him to maintain contact with the world beyond his shop. His first customer arrived at 8, a regular Mrs. Chen, whose ancient Toyota needed brake work. She was a widow in her 70s who treated every conversation like a confessional, sharing details about her children and grandchildren that Marcus never asked to hear. He usually tuned her out, making non-committal sounds while focusing on the work order. But today, Mrs. Chen stopped mid-sentence about her grandson's college applications and pointed toward the corner. "Marcus, you have a dog?" Marcus turned. The border collie had emerged from behind the tool cabinet and sat watching them, alert but calm. "Stray showed up last night," Marcus said. "Storm was bad. I'll call animal control today." Mrs. Chen walked over to the dog, moving slowly. To Marcus's surprise, the dog didn't retreat. It sat perfectly still, allowing her to approach, even leaning slightly into her hand when she bent to pet its head. "Poor thing," she said. "Look at those eyes. Smart dog. Border collies are working dogs, you know. Need jobs, need purpose. They don't do well abandoned." She looked up at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. Kind of like some people. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "I'll get started on those brakes." Mrs. Chen straightened. "My late husband and I had a border collie when we lived in Seattle, before we retired here. Best dog we ever had. Loyal beyond measure. They bond deeply, sometimes to one person, sometimes to a family. But once they bond, it's for life. They don't forget, and they don't give up." "That's nice," Marcus said flatly, pulling her keys from the pegboard. "I'll have your car ready by noon." After Mrs. Chen left, Marcus worked on the brake job while trying to ignore the dog, which had returned to its corner, but kept watching him. Every time Marcus glanced over, those dark eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. It was like the dog was waiting for something, expecting something Marcus wasn't capable of providing. By 10 o'clock, 2 more customers had come and gone, both commenting on the dog, both sharing advice Marcus didn't ask for. The consensus seemed to be that he should keep it, that it was clearly well-trained, that someone would be looking for it, but might never find it, that he looked like he could use the company. That last comment came from Bill Hendricks, who owned the feed store in town and whose truck Marcus had been maintaining for 3 years. Bill was one of the few people Marcus didn't actively dislike, mostly because Bill respected silence and never asked personal questions. "Just saying," Bill added, loading his repaired truck with supplies he'd picked up in town. "A man out here alone might be good to have something watching his back. Border collies are protective. They sense things." "I don't need protection," Marcus said. "Didn't say you did. But sometimes what we need and what we think we need are different things." Bill climbed into his truck, then leaned out the window. "My wife's cousin breeds working dogs up in Great Falls. I could ask around if you want. See if anyone's reported this one missing." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, do that." After Bill left, Marcus finally called the county animal control office. A bored-sounding woman named Jennifer told him they'd send someone out in the next day or two to pick up the stray. unless Marcus wanted to bring it in himself. "We're pretty full right now," Jennifer said. "Storm brought in a lot of strays. If it's not aggressive, might be easier to hold on to it until space opens up. Sometimes takes a week." "A week?" "Sometimes longer. Budget cuts, you know. We do our best." Marcus hung up, frustration burning in his chest. A week. That meant 7 more days of those eyes watching him. 7 more days of feeling like the dog could see every secret he'd buried, every failure he'd tried to forget. The phone rang. The shop line. Not his personal cell that almost never rang, because almost no one had the number. Marcus answered with his standard greeting. "Webb's Auto." "Mr. Webb?" A man's voice, rough and uncertain. "This is Carl Morrison. Bill Hendricks gave me your number. He said you found a border collie." Marcus's stomach tightened. "Maybe. What's yours look like?" "Black and white. Female. She's got one ear that flops down. Answers to Maggie. She's been missing for 3 days. We've been looking everywhere." The dog, Maggie, lifted her head at the sound of her name coming through the phone speaker. "Where'd you lose her?" Marcus asked. "Out near the Beartooth Highway. We were camping, me and my boy. Maggie wandered off during the night. We searched for 2 days before we had to come home. My son's been heartbroken. That dog means everything to him." Something in the man's voice didn't sit right with Marcus. Too practiced, too smooth despite the rough edges. Marcus had learned to read voices during his years in intelligence work, learned to hear the lies underneath the words. "I'll need proof she's yours," Marcus said. "Vet records, photos, something." Brief silence. "Well, we just got her a few months back. Don't have much paperwork yet, but she's ours, no question." "Then you won't mind coming out here so the dog can identify you? Dogs remember their owners." "Listen, Mr. Webb, I don't appreciate the 3rd degree. That's my dog, and I want her back." Marcus felt the old instincts kick in. The hyper-awareness, the analytical detachment, the ability to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously. "You show up here with proof, I'll hand her over. Until then, she stays." "You can't just—" Marcus hung up. He looked at Maggie, who was standing now, tense, her eyes fixed on him. "That your owner?" The dog's ears flattened slightly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's what I thought." He spent the next hour running searches on his laptop, digging into databases he probably shouldn't still have access to, but did because his old handler had never bothered to revoke his credentials. Carl Morrison existed. Lived in Laurel, worked at a warehouse, had a son named Tyler who was 8. But there were no camping permits filed for the Beartooth area in the last month, no veterinary records for any dog in Morrison's name, and no social media posts about a missing pet. More concerning, Carl Morrison had a record. Nothing major. Domestic disturbances, a DUI, some petty theft charges that got pled down. But enough to paint a picture of someone Marcus wouldn't trust with a goldfish, let alone a highly trained working dog. His phone rang again. Different number, same area code. "This is Webb." "Mr. Webb, this is Sheriff's Deputy Kate Reeves. I understand you have a dog that may belong to a local resident?" Marcus felt cold settle into his bones. Involving law enforcement meant scrutiny, meant questions, meant his carefully constructed isolation could start to crack. "I found a stray. Called animal control this morning. Mr. Morrison filed a report saying you're refusing to return his property. Morrison hasn't provided proof of ownership. When he does, he can have the dog." "That's reasonable," Deputy Reeves said, her tone shifting slightly. "Between you and me, Morrison's been on our radar. Nothing we can pin on him, but we've had complaints. If you're willing, I can come out and document the dog's condition. Might be helpful if things get complicated." "How complicated are we talking?" "Hard to say. But if that dog is his and it's been abused or neglected, we'd need evidence for prosecution. I saw the photo he sent around. That's a valuable dog. Probably $1,000 range if it's properly trained. If he didn't take care of it, that's animal cruelty. Marcus looked at Maggie, who was watching him with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. $1,000. Valuable enough to lie about. Definitely valuable enough to come looking for. "Come out tomorrow morning," Marcus said. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there. And Mr. Webb, keep your doors locked tonight." The line went dead. Marcus spent the rest of the day hyper-alert, checking the windows between jobs, making sure the doors stayed locked. He installed the dog on a blanket near his workstation, where he could keep an eye on her. Maggie seemed content with the arrangement, lying quietly, but watching everything with absolute focus. At 6, Marcus closed up shop and brought Maggie into the house, the first time he'd let any living thing cross that threshold in 6 years. He told himself it was temporary, just until the situation with Morrison resolved itself. But as he made dinner, actual dinner, not a microwave burrito, he found himself cooking extra chicken breast and rice for the dog. They ate together in the small kitchen, Marcus at the table, Maggie on the floor nearby. The silence felt different than it usually did, less oppressive, more companionable. After dinner, Marcus checked all the window locks twice, verified the alarm system he'd installed was armed, and retrieved the Glock 19 from the bedroom safe. Maggie watched all of this with calm attention, as if she understood exactly what these preparations meant. "You're not my dog," Marcus told her as he settled on the couch with the gun on the coffee table. "Soon as this is sorted out, you're going wherever you're supposed to go." Maggie tilted her head, then walked over and lay down at his feet, close enough to be present, far enough to respect his space. Marcus turned on the television, some mindless news program he wasn't really watching. His mind kept circling back to Morrison's voice, to the deputy's warning, to the way Maggie had reacted when she heard her name. Something was wrong with this situation beyond the obvious. Border collies didn't end up abandoned without reason, and highly trained dogs didn't wander away from their owners without cause. Around midnight, as Marcus was drifting towards sleep on the couch, unwilling to go to the bedroom because it felt too far from the doors, Maggie's head came up suddenly. Her ears stood straight, every muscle tense. Marcus was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. "What is it?" Maggie stood, walked to the front door, and sat. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, unblinking. A low growl rumbled from her chest, the first aggressive sound Marcus had heard her make. Then he heard it too, footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, trying to be quiet. Marcus killed the lights and moved to the window, peering through the edge of the curtain. A truck sat at the end of his driveway, lights off. He couldn't make out the plates, but it was a dark-colored pickup, common enough in Montana to be impossible to identify. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched, broken only by Maggie's low, continuous growl. Marcus kept his eyes on the darkness beyond the window, his mind cataloging options. The alarm would sound if anyone tried the doors or windows. He had his phone in his pocket, could call 911 in seconds. The deputy had warned him, which meant she'd take a call seriously. But calling meant more questions, more involvement, more people knowing where he was and who he'd become. The old habits screamed at him to handle this himself, to confront whoever was out there and make it clear they'd picked the wrong target. Maggie pressed against his leg, not cowering but positioning herself between Marcus and the door. Protective. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the truck's engine started, and red taillights disappeared down the gravel road. Marcus stood at the window for another half hour, making sure they were really gone. Maggie remained alert the entire time, only relaxing when Marcus finally holstered the gun and turned the lights back on. "Good girl," Marcus said quietly, and something in his chest cracked a little when Maggie's tail wagged once. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Maggie. They sat together in the darkness, two survivors keeping watch. And for the first time in 6 years, Marcus Webb didn't feel entirely alone.